At dawn in the summer of 1946, Theodore Ted Bundy was born in Burlington, Vermont. His birth was not as public as it had been claimed. He was born out of wedlock and then handed over to relatives by his biological mother. From the very beginning, his life was shaped by a sense of rejection and stigma, as a child quickly hiding from society's gaze. His early life was nurtured between the homes of relatives, moving between caring mothers and strict nannies who knew nothing of his true roots. This profound sense of instability planted the seeds of shyness and isolation, but it also nurtured a hidden sense of self-affirmation. By the end of his high school years, Ted appeared to be a somewhat introverted young man. His teachers taught him seriously, and social life seemed to him a field of contradictory experiments. He longed for friendship, but trembled at the thought of rejection. He wrote short memoirs about his inadequacy and insignificance, before erasing them with hidden enthusiasm. After graduating from high school, he enrolled at the University of Washington in the fall of 1965. He chose psychology as a major, seemingly out of a desire to understand people, but behind that desire perhaps lay a desire to uncover their deepest secrets and fears so he could control them. In college, Ted quickly became the model student. He earned honors academically and joined the wrestling team, where he stood out among his peers. His athletic physique and academic excellence were evidence of an inner confidence, even if it appeared to be a carefully crafted mask. At parties and college events, Bundy would open doors for women with conspicuous kindness and help professors with their paperwork. Everyone praised him, believing him to be just a generous and romantic young man. No one realized at the time that these noble acts were a veiled test of the victim's trust to get closer to him before he fell. Deep within Bundy's mind, a deep-seated desire to control both his body and his soul arose. This desire was not merely a sense of empowerment. It was also a deadly bet on the mask's ability to deceive those around him. He began engaging in strange behavior, spying on his neighbors at night, taking notes on their paths, and imagining their reactions if they confronted him. By 1973, his psychological tools were complete: academic knowledge in psychology, physical prowess in wrestling, and a polished college appearance. All these factors combined to transform him from a shy young man into a master of disguise, capable of luring his victims with extreme skill. His life on campus was nothing but intensive training. He continued to disguise himself as helping a student in need or rescuing a minor from a car wreck, but he also watched the sparks of interest in his victims' eyes, drawing from them a dose of determination to take the next step. Finally, the perfect web of color was complete, a well-crafted evil charged with inner fear. Here, precisely, the horrific chapter in Ted Bundy's life began. A chapter that would transform the university into a crime scene, none of which concealed the true killer's identity. As the winter of 1973 approached, the world had no idea that the gentle face it saw in lecture halls and libraries would soon become the devil disguised as a human corpse. This is the time for the next chapter, where we will recount the beginnings of the crimes of the first series. December 1973. The first sign. Karen Sparks, a University of Washington student, was facing one of the dark alleys behind the Moore Library. On a freezing night, her car engine stalled, and she went out looking for help. She spotted a well-dressed young man who offered to come fix the problem. She approached cautiously, only to find herself gagged and his iron fist locked. When the unknown man failed to catch her amid her screams, he fled, leaving behind her handbag and broken glasses. The incident was told in faltering tones, and Karen's blood froze. She survived with half a life on one side and half the silence in the university auditorium on the other. January 12, 1974. The abduction of Linda Haley. On a foggy morning, Linda left her apartment in the Brookside neighborhood and headed back to her library. Little did she know that a young man was waiting for her near the corner of the building. He asked her for help moving a heavy box to his broken-down car. She turned around for a few moments, then disappeared without the slightest sign of fear. When police found her body 3 days later, it was lying on the yellow sands of Espy Island Beach, miles from where she disappeared. Her face looked inhuman, and the broken bones in her neck spoke of brutal horror. Late January, the killing field expands. Based on a week after Linda's murder, 2 bodies were discovered side by side near Magno Lake, north of the city. Margaret Bowman, 22, and Pamela DeWitt, 25. This time, the attack had occurred during the day, carried out with a sharp knife after severe beatings. The brutality of the wounds and the bloody motifs on their clothing pointed to a sick ritual. All the evidence led police to wonder, would we uncover a single, pure hand, or multiple killers. Seattle police at a loss a few weeks ago. Seattle police had no track record of the killer. Descriptions of the suspect varied among 2 or 3 victims. Some had whistled his voice before the appointment. Others noticed his advanced boldness and a blank stare. Investigators had logged dozens of reports of a man sticking stickers on broken-down cars or offering help near library parking lots. Forensic analysis began to suggest that kidnappings and murders shared a common signature, but they lacked a clear link between the victims. Bundy coached himself. Behind the walls, Bundy reviewed his actions like a chess player scrolling through strategies on a wooden board. He took meticulous notes on each attempt: the timing of the abduction, the victim's reaction, the sound of her breathing when she felt scared, and the amount of resistance. His notebook even contained a rough sketch of a map of the city, marking the drop-off points for victims. As long as nothing official was known about him, he was completely safe to plan the next attack. Media ignites terror with the first killings. Headlines focused public attention on the beach. Morning newspapers were filled with photos of alleged victims and interviews with survivors complaining about the frequent appearance of a dark-colored car near the university. Terror swept through the academic silence. Women preferred to travel in groups, and regular guards were increasingly present in the back corridors of buildings. Interstate coordination, the case was transferred to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. After the first threads, linking at least 5 similar attacks, became clear, an operations center was set up in Seattle, including forensic psychology experts, and evidence was gathered from Oregon and Utah. Initial analysis suggested that this killer carefully selected his victims, studying the implications of their behavior before contradictory evidence and hidden hope. While police officers opened hundreds of files, people were placed in the virtual dock: truck drivers, maintenance workers, even teachers. Yet the surprise remained even greater than them. None of the suspects resembled the nice guy image he'd surpassed and controlled the killing. Hope seemed to be running out, but everyone was certain that a 6th victim was inevitable. Chapter end. Dispatch signed by the spring of 19. Ted Bundy appeared faintly on the radar, with preliminary evidence of his old car and his rust-scraping skills. But no charges were filed, and the larger concern continued to haunt the police. Some information was stolen, and disagreements arose between the crime teams over the priority: apprehending one suspect or preventing the next attack. What awaits us in Part 3? We leave here the dawn of the horror series, as the killer drew ever closer to his victims, and the police began to smell blood mixed with their inability to catch him. In the next part, we review the series' expansion to other states, the details of the first escape that shook criminal centers, before the true face of the first amazing nightmare in American history is revealed. Spring 1974. The violent journey west as the Washington winter drew to a close. Bundy drove his car across the border into Oregon, Utah, and Colorado. In April and May, the number of victims suddenly increased. Women were killed in his familiar pattern, their bodies dumped in remote areas surrounded by forests and mountains. The terrain influenced the investigation. Behind every hill and dark spot, it was difficult to connect the incidents conclusively. Summer 1974. Blood in the trees of Colorado in June. Police discovered the body of a teenage girl near a mountain park in Colorado. This wasn't an isolated incident. A week later, a second body was found 10 miles south, following the same pattern of abduction and brutal beatings before the murder. Suspicion arose that a serial killer had moved from the northwest and was wreaking havoc in the mountain state. November 1974. Carol DeRonch's decisive attempt on a frigid night near the Park City Lake project in Utah. Carol DeRonch was struck by a well-dressed young man who offered to help her carry a heavy box. When she lost her balance, Ted tried to attach plastic handcuffs to her wrists. Carol immediately claimed she had forgotten her phone in her car and managed to flee screaming. Police provided her with a detailed account of her description and measurements, which constituted the first direct evidence linking Bundy to the attempted kidnappings. August 1975. The innocent arrest in Granger after months of relative silence. Utah police arrested Ted for stealing refrigerator motors from a home in Granger. The suspect was very quiet during questioning and had not been named in the Hollywood murders. He was released on low bail, but Officer Carol DeRonch recognized him from published photos and reopened the case with a formal report. The first Utah trial. The moment of confrontation in the spring of 1976. Bundy was tried in Salt Lake City solely for the kidnapping of On the stand, the elegant man in a dark suit, speaking in a soft voice, reduced the crime to a simple error of judgment. He declined to defend himself, but the overwhelming evidence, especially the plastic ligature found, earned him an initial 10-year sentence. June 1977, first escaped from Aspen Prison. While being transported to the Napa County Courthouse in Colorado, he used his need for a small screwdriver to repair a window in his temporary cell. He drilled a hole in the metal roof, climbed into the attic of the courthouse, and slipped through the vent to the street. The escape lasted 6 days, during which he sent a newspaper headlined "Fake Justice" to the press, before being returned by helicopter to the Steel Cave. December 1977. Second escape from Putnam, Florida. While awaiting his new trial in Florida, Bundy was allowed to use the exercise space in an attic cell at the Putnam complex. He dug a hole in the bottom of a closet near the ceiling and walked through the air conditioning ducts to the outside. This time, he quickly took to the streets of Lake Station before being caught by police patrols 3 days later. Amidst local panic, January 1978, the bloody chapter at Florida State University, Ted returned to the shadows with a more brazen act in Tallahassee. On January 15th, he broke into a Chi Omega sorority house and murdered 3 girls during night classes. The horror of the act was matched by the students' shock. The campus recoiled in a terrified silence. As the news spread across the major newspapers, final arrest. The web closes after 2 weeks of sweeping the lawns. Tallahassee police spotted his suspicious car parked next to a small park. When he attempted to escape, a limited gunfire exchange resulted in a minor wound to one hand. Bundy was arrested for the last time on February 15, 1978. He was then taken to the FBI and placed in a narrow solitary confinement cell under unprecedented security measures. Before the execution, The Passion for Light and The Mask. The Florida State University crime remained the last chapter in the bloody series. A series of media trials began in Miami and Tallahassee, where Bundy challenged the judges to conduct his own defense, describing himself as a wolf sharpening metal. In the flickering camera reflections and the shouts of the crowd, the world began to realize the last vestiges of a mask. A human face exposing the moral shame of the most brutal crimes. The Justice Theater opens at the beginning of 1979. Bundy was brought into the courtroom in Tallahassee, Florida, where the hearing became an unparalleled visual and journalistic spectacle. Floodlights followed him from every angle, and cameras spun him around like a movie star. Not only was his defense attorney on the stand, but he was also a majestic platform for the entire world to witness the horror of human nature. The prosecution recounts the horror on the 3rd day of the hearings. The prosecution reviewed thousands of pages of evidence, remnants of the victims' personal belongings, photographs of the bodies, and an audio recording of Bundy's recorded confessions. Prosecutors intensified their arguments about the pattern of repeated killings and the incidents of escape, emphasizing the deliberate violation of the sanctity of life. Ironically, the theatrical press presence grew with each shot, adding new pain. Bundy's defense embraces heroism. Ted, who had decided to defend himself, wore a tailored suit and stood before the judge, confidently declaring, "I will not let the court stain my reputation with crimes I did not commit." He used dazzling narrative logic and analyzed technical evidence with such precision that it was questionable whether the rope was connected to the plastic ties. His brilliance obscured for many the fact that he was adept at twisting the facts. Survivors' testimony. The court received rare testimony from survivors who, fortunately, held Bundy's guilt first in their hearts before any judicial ruling. Carol Darrench and Helen Burns described moments of confrontation, the killer's whisper in their ear, the storms of fear under the dim light. Their honest testimony was like a city of lights, exposing the darkness Bundy tried to hide behind his smile. A grand media parade every day, television stations and hordes of reporters attended. The courtroom bleachers became concert venues, and audiences applauded when the famous defendant entered. Bundy's appearance in a seductive suit and elegant hat redefined the question: are we sympathetic to a human being who is a self-evident criminal? Sentencing and execution. In August 1979, the death sentence was pronounced by the infamous black electricity in Florida. Bundy was taken to a cramped waiting cell, surrounded by a dim green light and deadly silence. Years of appeals passed, and as the moment of execution drew nearer, the debate over the moral legitimacy of the death penalty grew louder. Appeals and respite. Bundy's defense filed dozens of requests for a clean bill of health and relief, but the Supreme Court rejected all of them. The wait for execution dragged on until newspapers anticipated the most famous execution in American history. He was no longer just a serial killer, but a phenomenon shaped around the question: which standards are moral, and which are vengeful? Execution chamber. At dawn, on January 24, 1989, Bundy was led into a dimly lit room, under heavy guard and briefly attended by the psychiatric officer and the chaplain. He was dressed in a white prisoner's robe, and his wrists were bound with cold, confident handcuffs. Amid the clatter of locks being picked and the fading silence, he felt a distress unlike any escape he had experienced before. The final moments, the priest held Bundy's hand as he said a final prayer, but he didn't respond. Officially, the doctor pronounced him dead from electrocution at 7:16 a.m. Bundy let out only short breaths and a blank stare, as if he knew his mask was no longer fit for display. The lesson that never dies. Despite the disappearance of his body, Bundy remains alive in the memory of law and criminal psychology. His case marked a watershed in the development of interstate coordination and the development of models for predicting the behavior of serial killers. Most importantly, he taught us to look at actions before appearances, and to protect society through education and vigilance, not instincts alone.